Hi guys, it is Bailey with True Blue Flower Company. I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of the moisture consistency I use for making my 2-inch soil blocks. So you can see they have the small divot in here. I've got potting soil that was purchased. You can make your own mix too. I choose to just buy a potting soil. The moisture level I'm looking for is probably wetter than most of you would ever use if you've used a regular tray. So kind of like a sandcastle, you want it wet enough that it sticks together, but not too wet where it falls apart. So like I said, the goal, a good way to test is to grab some in your hand. This might even be a little much. Squeeze the water out. And if it sticks together like a snowball, it's at a good moisture. If it's too dry, like here's obviously, if I try to squeeze that together, this doesn't have enough moisture. It just crumbles. And if it were to be too wet, here I can show you a little example. Too wet, and I can't really squeeze it together too. I can, but it just kind of flows out of my hand. So this is far too wet. So see, like this is when you can see like the sitting water and it's jiggly. That's too wet. I can't easily scoop that. What happens is it just falls out of the soil blocker. So I'm gonna add a little bit more dry matter to it. Get us back to a kind of a good grabbable consistency. There. So I'm going to take my soil blocker, kind of grind, wiggle it back and forth on the bottom. You can see here I just check it to make sure each one's filled. If you have it where one isn't filling, like you're wiggling it back and forth, but one always seems to fall out back in here, it might be too wet where it doesn't have enough stick to stay in, or you don't have enough soil in here. If you have it where they're not filling up all the way, like you squeeze them out and the top doesn't seem like it filled all the way, that's usually because it's too dry. Like it'll get packed halfway in there and then stick because it's too dry. It can't fill all the grooves. So I'm just gonna put this on here, give you a quick example of what they look like. This is perfect. I can pick these up easily. They don't fall apart. They're a nice full square. I'll show you what it looks like if they're too wet first. I'll do. See, I can't even pack it in there. It's too wet where it doesn't stay in there. And even if I were to pack that in there, when I try to flip it over and squeeze it out, I can't really. They turned out okay, but when I'm trying to pick these up, they're just, well, they're not as, these ones I can, and they hold their shape. These are a lot, they're just too wet. Like I said, it just makes things a lot harder. You can do it, but like I said, you can't fill it up. And if that happens where you're filling it up and then you squeeze it out and they might be too short or one's empty, just way too hard. So I will add some dry matter to show what it's like here. If I get it too dry. This just takes practice. I like putting it in a separate container that is deep enough that I can wiggle and fill it, but so watch, it's gonna work for me just fine. The larger soil blocks are a little more forgiving than the small ones. Okay, well, this worked out okay, but it just makes things a little more difficult. As you can see, there's almost like dried layers. It doesn't have the same stick. It wants to fall apart a little easier. There's parts that come off. Let me try a better example. Get some drier stuff in here. You can see they don't fill all the way up because it's not sticky enough to hold together. See, that's a good example. Like the tops aren't flat, they're just kind of crumbly, where they're very sensitive, very touchy. Maybe you'll get one good one, but the rest are too crumbly. They won't hold together when you start watering them. These will like dry out together and just until the roots form a kind of a lattice to keep them together. So anyways, that's just a few tips on moisture for soil blocking. Like I said, it's wetter than you would typically make for seed making, and a good way to test is to try a few rounds, and if it crumbles too easy like this, too dry, and if it seems hard to stick into your soil blocker, it's probably too wet. So play around and you'll get a good feel for it.